For decades, science fiction has been used to explore what the future of humanity could look like. These stories are usually dystopian, highlighting key issues in our society today through metaphors and symbolism in a seemingly unrealistic setting. This genre has experienced different levels of popularity throughout history, with some of the most famous films of all time fitting into it. But with the rapid advancements we're seeing in technology, many people are asking the question, is sci-fi dying? Let's look at arguably the two most popular sci-fi movies, 2001: A Space Odyssey and Star Wars. Whilst these films are very different from one another, it's the shared sense of wonder they inspire that made them such cinematic landmarks. Going back to the 60s and 70s when these films were made, there was no digital editing and CGI didn't exist yet. This meant that practical methods to create other worlds had to be found. Stanley Kubrick wanted a character to look like they were defying gravity, but he didn't have a way to do it in post-production, so rotatable sets were made to film with. George Lucas wanted a land speeder to look like it was floating above the sand, but he couldn't use digital software to do that, so he fitted mirrors below the vehicle to reflect the sand and hide the wheels. What I'm getting at here is, since these effects could not be made with computers, audiences in the cinema would have had no idea how these contraptions worked, building the sense of wonder that sci-fi so heavily relies on. Nowadays, we can look at any spaceship or alien and know it was animated by a 3D artist. This is not at all to discredit the artists. Thousands of animators put in countless hours of work to create some truly spectacular effects. But I feel that knowing how these effects were made prevents us from getting that same sense of awe that audiences experienced with classic sci-fi. It's not just advancements in filmmaking technology that have this effect on sci-fi. Real-life scientific breakthroughs give us more of an insight into the universe around us, which of course impacts how we perceive and represent it in movies. 2001: A Space Odyssey came out in 1968, 1 year before the moon landing. This is what footage of space looked like at that time. Because this footage was so bad, audiences were stunned at Kubrick's visuals of ships in orbit. In a similar vein, the flying X-Wings in Star Wars would have been incredible to see for the first time because there was nothing else like them. These days, sure, the big ships and planets in The Creator look cool, but I can literally look back in time 13.5 billion years at the most distant known galaxies in 4K using the James Webb Telescope. Because we have access to incredible images of our own universe, seeing new worlds in sci-fi movies just isn't that exciting anymore. Big establishing shots of fictional planets simply don't fill us with the same excitement they used to, so we don't feel as immersed in these new universes. Furthermore, the fact we've now seen new worlds so many times before makes the impact they have on us even smaller. There's 12 films and 33 series worth of shows in the Star Wars universe, 11 movies and 4 series worth of shows set in space in the MCU, along with countless other original sci-fi projects. Genuinely, what more is there to see? This oversaturation of the genre has led to audiences feeling bored of adventures on different planets. Sure, the fact that many of the movies coming out today are science fiction may seem to go against the idea that the genre is dying, but its death doesn't only relate to films not being made anymore, it can relate to the quality and audience reception of them. There are many ways sci-fi could be dying, but I do also think the genre could have a very bright future ahead of it. An argument can be made that improvements in technology can only further sci-fi storytelling. Sure, many people care less about seeing other fictional worlds when we can look at real distant galaxies, but many others feel more immersed in these stories when they have better visuals, which I completely understand. Advancements in graphics and animation technology, such as motion capture and the creation of the volume, can create more convincing effects, which entices a lot of people. The Mandalorian used the volume, which is technology that makes use of multiple screens rendering environments in Unreal Engine, to create deserts for the show. This method allows for depth and dynamic lighting while shooting, creating a much more realistic effect than a green screen. For the first season of the show, this genuinely looked incredible because it was paired with the beautiful cinematography of Greg Fraser, who also used the technology on The Batman. When the volume is misused and mixed with bad composition, it can look cheap and tacky, but when it's used considerately, it can produce some stunning effects. Speaking of Greg Fraser, 2 of the films he recently worked on support the arguments that sci-fi is not dying. Dune Part 1 and 2 were massive successes, both critically and financially, showing that if there's an interesting story, compelling characters and unique visuals, audiences will still flock to cinemas for a science fiction adventure. Dune Part 2 is the highest grossing film of the year so far, so obviously there are still people that want to watch sci-fi movies. The Dune franchise isn't just doing well from a numbers standpoint either, it's actually having a cultural impact. The amount of people calling themselves Paul Muad'Dib Atreides or shouting Lisan al-Gaib on Instagram and TikTok shows there's actual audience engagements with these films. Now let's look at the big boy of British sci-fi. Doctor Who. This show has been a staple of the country since 1963, consistently delivering otherworldly adventures to our television screens. Well, I say consistently, but it stopped for 16 years. Since the 2005 reboot, Doctor Who has seen massive rises in popularity due to brilliant character writing, interesting stories and themes, and a genuine sense of wonder. Until it fell off massively. But now it's back. Old showrunner Russell T Davies and new Doctor Ncuti Gatwa are bringing us new time-travelling adventures in the form of a semi-reboot. Regardless of how I feel about this new season so far, I do think this reboot is a good thing. Audiences have become very distant from the show in the last few years due to some awful writing and terrible character decisions, so wiping the slate kind of clean and starting again is great. I really do like the way Doctor Who does reboots. Nothing from the past is erased, the previous stories are all still canon, but it just provides a start point for new fans. Whilst my love for the show is always going to be in the Stephen Moffat era, I do really like Ncuti as an actor, and I'm excited to see where the show goes next. This reboot of the show has been really popular, again showing that audiences are still interested in sci-fi as long as there are interesting characters and stories being told. Additionally, the much bigger budget the show has been given allows for a deeper, more visually interesting way of exploring these new worlds. Combine this with the big marketing push that Disney's giving it, and I can see the show rising in popularity a lot in the next few years. I think many people also forget that sci-fi doesn't have to be on different planets, or thousands of years in the future. Planet of the Apes is sci-fi, Spider-Man is sci-fi, Attack of the Meth Gator is sci-fi. There's many different ways filmmakers can approach this genre, which means there's so many different stories to be told. Overall, I think there are a lot of solid arguments for both sides. Personally, I feel quite distant from the genre, as its oversaturation and the progression of real-world technology has made my interest fade. However, I love good stories and characters in all genres, so I'm going to watch Dune Messiah. I'm going to continue watching Doctor Who, and I'm going to watch whatever Godzilla movie Toho makes next. I loved recent films like Poor Things and Everything Everywhere All at Once, and sure, there's been a large decline in public interest in sci-fi, and in my opinion, the genre as a whole has gotten worse over time, but there's still a lot of gems in the sea of mid-releases. Thanks for watching.